Done.
All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for RSVPing to this webinar. This is like the 5th, 6th, or 7th, I lose track, that the Distance Education Affinity Group has been able to put together with help from faculty and staff throughout the state. Thank you for joining us today. Next slide, please. We're going to be talking about, well, not me, our esteemed presenters are going to be talking about academic integrity and feedback in the virtual learning environment. Next slide, please. So I'm Jake Farbman. For those of you who've never met me before, a long time community college guy. Started at community college, had the opportunity to get a job at the Council of County Colleges many years ago, and they've been very good to me, and I'm now the executive director of your statewide Center for Student Success. So the Distance Education Affinity Group folks and I were having a conversation, and they said, you know, maybe there's something we can do to help our faculty and staff throughout the state strengthen what it is we do in delivering online, remote, emergency instruction and student services programs, because we're not going to be going back to teaching face-to-face anytime soon. This was a conversation we had about 3 months ago. And so quickly, boom, the distance education folks turned it around, and we're able to place some professional development webinars in place. So welcome, everybody. Next slide, please, Dr. Bella De Castro. Okay, so just a few of the housekeeping rules here, because we are using, graciously, Dr. Monroe has allowed us to use the Essex County College Zoom account. So just a few housekeeping rules. It's not that we don't want to have a chat with all of you and talk with all of you. I would love to. We just can't. So please mute all of your microphones. You'll see me. I'm going to mute mine when I'm finished doing my introduction here. Also, the cameras. We don't want to crash the system. It's not that we don't want to see your wonderful smiling faces, but please turn your cameras off. If you have questions, you'll see there's a chat icon at the bottom here. If you scroll your mouse, you'll see a chat icon. Please type your questions in the chat box, and we will address them after our presenters share their information. I believe that's everything on housekeeping rules. We're also recording this webinar. We're going to place it and make it available on the Center for Student Success website and the YouTube page. We're also going to send out all the PowerPoint slides. We'll send them out. We'll put those up on the website as well for you to download as PDF. So everything will be available to you within 24 to 48 hours, as soon as we can get the link emailed to us from the Zoom folks, and we can convert it and get it up on our website. With that, can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so just a big shout out to the folks. The entire Distance Education Affinity Group really came together to help us do all of that. But I want to just give a particular shout out to 3 people. The president of the Education Affinity Group, Josh Pennington from Rowan College of South Jersey. The vice president, who you'll hear from in a moment, Dr. Lee Bello De Castro at Essex County College, and the secretary, Dr. Nora Kermakuri at Brookdale Community College. These folks really came together, stepped up to the plate, really helped to develop these series of topics and delivering these topics. And many members of the Distance Education Affinity Group have been presenters throughout this whole series and will continue to be going forward. We just very much appreciate their dedication to the community college sector in New Jersey, to all of their fellow faculty and staff throughout the state, and to the Council of County Colleges and the Center for Student Success for doing this. Okay, next slide. And let me, I believe, introduce Dr. Bella De Castro. Thank you all.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us. And just to reiterate, so when we originally did the Eventbrite link, I neglected to put everybody on mute as you were coming in. So if you could just make sure that your microphones are on mute so we don't get any of the background interference. But we, once again, as Jake had just mentioned, the Distance Ed Affinity Group members, we really wanted to help out our faculty, not only within our institutions, which every single one of us has done in some capacity, some way, shape, or form, but we came together as a group to provide this additional workshops to the state. And with that being said, and I say this with every single workshop that we've done so far, Each and every single institution in the state of New Jersey runs independently of each other, even though we collaborate and we talk amongst ourselves, and we have our affinity groups and our President's Council. Each one of us runs differently. So we have different LMS systems, different plagiarism systems, different different ways of doing things. So keep in mind that these are tips from some of our esteemed colleagues from across the state. And with that being said, our agenda for today, we have a great agenda. Melanie Mars from Raritan Valley, she gave us a presentation at the Distance Ed Affinity Group about a year ago on her research, and we really wanted her research on plagiarism and cheating out there so everybody can understand, because we know that we went from an emergency remote teaching situation to a fully online teaching situation. So we felt that this research was extremely important. So after Melanie, we have, I've got nothing to work with, and I know Archana is going to discuss that. We're also going to be talking about some various tools, including UniCheck, Turnitin, and providing student feedback. So once again, what we're going to ask you to do is, if you have questions, type it into the Q&A. Type it into the Q&A, into the chat room at the bottom. I'll be monitoring it, and I know we have some affinity group members on here monitoring it. And with that being said, I am going to turn this over to Miss Melanie Mars from Raritan Valley.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. And just to reiterate, if you wouldn't mind muting your mics, that would be really helpful if you're just coming in. I am going to talk with you about my sabbatical project. So next slide, if you would, and kick off by sharing some of the scholarship that I learned in my research on academic integrity, as well as a recent study that I conducted during the course of my sabbatical. So let's start off with some of those figures that you might actually find shocking. Next slide, please. So in summary, to review the literature in the background, how many people are engaged in cheating? Well, the International Center for Academic Integrity surveys students. This is actually work that comes out of Rutgers University, so yay, New Jersey, and Dr. Don McCabe. He's been surveying, or had surveyed, I should say, students over a 12-year period. And over that 12-year period on self-reports, 43% of graduate students reported having engaged in at least one act of academic integrity in their educational process, and 68% of undergraduate students did. I don't have this figure up here, but if you go down to high school, which he also studied, we get into the 90s. So this is a pretty widespread phenomenon. Dan Ariely also studies in this area, but he actually does some research on observational research. And so he puts people in a room, he gives them the opportunity to cheat, and he varies factors such as what that person could stand to gain, what the probability is of them being caught, and what the size of the punishment is. He finds in those controlled experiments, approximately 75% of people will cheat when given that opportunity, and the stakes are small. So he would caution us that while we might think it's a small number of big cheaters, what we actually encounter in our classrooms is a big number of small cheaters. You can go to the next slide. Let's talk for a little bit about course format, because that's going to get us into the research that Lee was talking about that I presented to the distance education group. Although there are surveys of both faculty and administrators that say that they believe that there are different types of course formats that lend themselves more to cheating, and not so that they think students taking one type of delivery system might cheat more than others. There are several studies that negate that, saying and finding that where there are instances of cheating in online courses, they're really no more prevalent than they are in live courses. So this is a general myth that we want to at least keep in the forefront of reviewing my research. So none of this research, however, has been conducted on community colleges. So if you go to the next slide, Lee. So that's where my sabbatical project comes in. I decided that I wanted to study the phenomenon of academic integrity or cheating in just New Jersey and just community college students. So I focused only on just one semester. So this is a really small snapshot as opposed to some of the longitudinal studies or data that I just shared with you. And one semester to 1 year. So fall 2017, spring 2018, or a student could have participated if they were taking classes throughout that academic year. I only looked at just students who were taking both on-campus and online classes in the exact same semester. So this is a much smaller subset. These aren't online only students, these aren't live classroom only students, but these are students that take classes in a variety of formats. I have also added some questions that I won't get to present on today, but if you have an interest in, connect with me offline on contemporary academic integrity issues, like for instance, the use of tutoring websites, and I tracked some information on honor codes as well. Next slide, please. So it was administered with the help of the Distance Education Affinity group. So thank you so much to those partners. 5 community colleges participated in the study, and I received 1,104 responses. And there were 3 research questions in my study, which I hope to give you the data for now. So if you go to the next slide, Lee. So this is the first research question. Are students' reports of cheating on examinations variable on the basis of the delivery mode of the course that they are taking? This research question lent itself to 5 survey questions. Now, before we go to the next slide, let me just tell you those 5 survey questions are actually for live and then once again for online. So students are asked about their conduct in their live classes, and then they're asked about their conduct in their online classes. So it's really ×2 if you think about it that way. All right, so here's your data. Go to the next slide. All right, the first question is, they asked the students if they had ever gotten answers from another person during an exam. And how I formatted these slides is that I put the higher number in yellow, so it would stand out a little bit more to those that are interested in the differences. You may just be interested in the overall numbers. You could see those numbers are pretty consistent, but live came out higher at 5%. Go ahead, next slide. This question is gotten answers from another person who took the exam before you. Online, I don't know if you can see that, that's 4.1. I guess I'll call out the numbers. Live was 6%, said yes, and online is 4.1. You can go to the next slide, please. This asked if they'd ever given answers to another student during any exam. Live was 6.5, where online came out at 4.0. If you're keeping track, we've got 2 more questions to go in this section pertaining just to exams. You can go to the next slide. I asked students if they had ever used prohibited materials during an exam. In the live, it was 4% said yes, and in online, that is 6.4. I don't know if that's hidden behind one of those Zoom panels. So that's 6.4%, so that came out higher. And then the final in this series of questions about exams, you could do the next slide, asks if the student has used prohibited technology during the exam. So live was 5% and online 8% said yes. So what you see here in summary is that if this is person-to-person cheating, it looks like students do that more in the live classroom, whereas if this is materials or technology-based cheating, it is more prominent in the online classroom. All right, next study question. Our students reported plagiarism on assignments variable on the basis of delivery mode. So you know the protocol now, you know what you're going to see. There are 7 survey questions with live and online next to each other. Go ahead to the next slide. I asked them if they'd copy and pasted work from a written source into an assignment and submitted it as their own, and 3.7 of the live did, and online you have a 3.1. Next slide. They submitted work written by somebody else as their own. In the live classroom they said 2.9%, and in the online classroom they said 1.9%. Next slide. They made up reference sources for a written assignment. In the live classroom, they said 5.8% as compared to the online classroom, where they said 3.1%. Okay, next slide. Had they copied a few sentences from a written source without citing them in an assignment? These numbers are much higher, probably predictably so. 12.1% of the live folks said yes, while online 8.7% said yes. We'll go to the next slide. This asks about purchasing or trading for an assignment from a paper writing service. Live students, 1.1%, where online is, that's 0.8%, said yes, they had done this. And next slide. Use prohibited materials to produce a written assignment. Apologize for the formatting there. Live is 1.9, and then online is 1.7. And the final of 7 in this section, having to do just with plagiarism, is did they use prohibited technology to produce a written assignment? And live we had 2.0, and then online was higher on this parameter, is 2.13%. The N is 1,104 students. I just saw that question pop up, so just to put that context back out there. Wonderful. So what you've seen in plagiarism is that all of these numbers were higher for live, with the difference of the last one, once again, prohibited technology, which was paralleled what we saw for the original one. Okay. Next. Okay, our students report of other academic instances or instances of academic dishonesty variable on the basis of delivery mode of the course they are taking. All right, so next slide. Okay, did they collaborate with others on coursework when collaboration was prohibited? In the live course, they said they did that 10.3%. And in the online course, they said they did that 6.8%. And the final question of the 14 or 28, if you times it by live and online, did you tell a professor that you submitted work that you really didn't submit? 5.86% of the live folks said that, and in online, 2.5% of the folks said that. Now, those are numbers where some of them might have been shocking, and you might have said, well, gee, there's fairly low numbers. Well, let's look at the last slide of some statistics. Let me just give you some aggregates. Thanks, Lee, you're awesome. Of the 14 measures for cheating in the survey, 11 were higher for live, and then 3 were higher for online. The aggregate cheating of all types, this was counted by a a student that reported that they had cheated on at least one of those 28 questions, that is 35%. So that's pretty consistent with prior findings. 1 out of every 3 students, in this case, cheated over the course of one academic year, or maybe even in one semester. The percentage of students caught, and now I asked them if they've ever been caught, not in that period of time necessarily, but that was 4.7%. So that's a pretty low figure, which leads me to conclude that this may be going on. They're saying it is, but we may not be catching them. And then I asked them a number of different questions, but this was a question that I thought you might really be interested in, is the percentage of students that believe that other students cheat more than they do, was 84%. So their choices were, do they cheat about the same? Do they cheat more, or do they cheat less? And 84% said other students are definitely cheating more than them, but the aggregate for all types of cheating was 35%. So I hope that's helpful in giving you some context on what my findings were in New Jersey. I'm pleased to turn this over to my colleague Archana, who's going to tell you what to do if you've got no tools to work with.
Thank you, Melanie. Good afternoon. My name is Archana Bhandari. I'm from Hudson County Community College. I'm going to address the situation where if you don't have any tools, what do you do? Next slide, please. So this is a situation you might be having in your college, but I've got nothing to work with. We just heard some really dramatic statistics and were quite scary. So what do you do when you don't have anything to work with? The reason that you feel like you may have nothing to work with is because everybody focuses on the precision tools. Tools that are built to catch academic dishonesty, such as anti-plagiarism tools or proctoring tools, and tools can be quite expensive. But you do have a lot to work without pool tools. You can address the root of the problem. So there are 2 really great ways to do this. Next slide, please. And I would like to talk about the first one, building to avoid dishonesty. So students cheat because sometimes they feel inadequate or they feel anonymous. Build your classroom environment. Have that safe space for learning. Build a trust relationship with your students. That way your students are less likely to want to cheat because they really want to do well in your course. Time is your friend. Time your assessments properly. Don't give excessive time. That way, even if a student is looking for answers, they will run out of time before they finish the assessment because they are basically looking for answers. Be open to different types of assessment. Don't just get stuck on one typical type of assessment, and instead of doing the same test, use authentic assessments, which are realistic. And though they take more time, the reward is huge in terms of learning. So really focus on giving yourself a chance to open up to different types of assessment. If you are using multiple choice questions in your tests, use it if it's appropriate. It's like if you need them to test them on their memory, rather than just use them all the time. Require students to apply what they learned for the assessment. This kind of use of assessment allows the student to learn while they're doing the assessment, problem solving, creating presentations, creative types of assessments like portfolios, research papers, doing journals, having discussions. You stimulate the learning while you're assessing them. So this kind of talks to a completely different type of thought process in your assessments. Using simulations, role play, you can have, you can use all these different types of assessments. You can use multiple type of assessments and use different types of assessments and do them many times as well. Next slide, please. So the second part of it is reinforcing integrity in your students. You need to clearly communicate your expectation to your students, especially if you have a diverse body of students. In some cultures, what you consider or what we consider academic dishonesty is actually not considered academic dishonesty. So be very clear what you consider what is considered dishonesty, and communicate your expectations very clearly. If your school has a policy, put it in the syllabus and address it right at the beginning of your course. And then remind the students about the academic dishonesty policy and the penalties that can occur if they should try to cheat. Try to assess at higher level of Bloom's taxonomy. Why is that? Because Bloom's taxonomy, as you go up, it gets harder to cheat and be dishonest in an assessment that involves creation, application, understanding. It encourages honesty. Rather than if you're testing just memory, then it is very easy to cheat in that. Try to use assignments and up-to-date topics that are different. So you get new assignments in, the old students can't pass on their work to your students. You put up-to-date topics, is going to interest your students. Your students are actually going to want to learn and want to address your questions. Change the exams from the previous term. It is very tempting to reuse. And you know, traditionally, that's what we used to do, reuse your work. But in this current atmosphere where you have so much technology, you're able to kind of share your resources, you really want to change your exams. If you can't change the exams, big part of the question, change the details. For example, in a math exam, you could change just a few numbers and the answers will change. And so this way you could have multiple questions that are similar, but not exactly the same. So your question bank can grow, you can have different questions, and you can really avoid cheating. So one thing to note is if you are using questions or like multiple choice, true and false, the typical Scantron type of questions that most exams do, the automated ones, try to use a large bank of randomized questions for the exam. So one student A will not get the same questions as student B. There will be different questions, and as well as there'll be different numbers in the question. So that way you're really avoiding cheating. So in short, I'm going to do this really shortly. You can do it without tools, but tools are very important. So I'm going to hand over next to Jennifer and Mary from Salem Community College. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary, do you want to start? Oh, I don't think I can hear Mary.
There we are. Okay, very good. Yes, welcome everybody. So we're going to give a little overview of UniCheck. Jennifer Martin has used UniCheck in her classes for this academic year, and we consider it both a plagiarism detection tool, but it also is a teaching tool as well. Lee, could I have the next slide, please?
Yeah, you call me every single day. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. So we switched from Turnitin to UniCheck in fall of 2019. It integrates with Canvas, but you also can have a separate account if you're using it outside of Canvas. At Salem, everybody has a Canvas course shell. We are trying to, we do require faculty to use Canvas for certain things, and we encourage them to use UniCheck with Canvas. Similarity report, once a student submits an assignment, the similarity report is generated pretty quickly, and they can actually see it as long as the instructor sets up the assignment so they can see the UniCheck similarity report. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Jen.
Thank you, Mary. So this, what you're seeing the screenshot right now is just a screenshot of what the similarity report looks like in UniCheck. Those of you who used Turnitin before, it's very, very similar. We made this switch at Salem Community College to save some money, but when I tested the two products, I'm really familiar with Turnitin, I didn't see that much of a discrepancy. I found this to be just as high quality, so that's why we made this switch. But I think it's important to step back a little bit and tell you a little bit about my philosophy on how I use plagiarism detection tools. So I'm an associate professor of English at Salem Community College. I mainly work with first year college students, so English Composition 1, some developmental English courses as well. So students who are just learning how to write in their own voice and how to trust themselves and realize that they actually have an opinion that their professors want to read and not just regurgitating what their sources have to say. So I've always been very open with students that I use these plagiarism detection tools, not as a gotcha, I caught you cheating type of tool, but rather as something that they have access to help them.
It's 153 people at this meeting.
Work with sources a little bit more clearly, and also to take the training wheels off of their over-reliance on directly quoting their sources. So what I have them do is, we use Canvas at Salem, so I have Unicheck embedded right in Canvas. They upload rough drafts of their essay, which I then have pair them through Canvas to do peer review. I find that to be very helpful. But in the rough draft, what I do is I enable Unicheck to be on, and I make it so that I do not save these drafts in the database, in the Unicheck database, so that they can reload up multiple rough drafts, and they're not going to see that they're plagiarizing themselves, and it would skew their similarity report. Within that, I then teach them how to go on in to check their similarity report and to see places where they have, matches to other sources. A lot of times they don't realize the over-reliance they have on direct quotes. And then that opens a whole conversation on how how paraphrasing could be preferred. Why was it that they took this information from one source and used that source's writing instead of paraphrasing or putting it into their own words? Was it something that they really even needed to cite, or is it something more that was common knowledge? So I find that in the rough draft phase that this opens up a whole wonderful conversation with students. And again, to let them know ahead of time that this is not something that I'm using as I'm going to find out that you cheated, but rather that this is a tool that's useful to them, just changes the entire conversation. So I find that to be really helpful. I do have students then submit their final drafts of essays also through our LMS, and that time I turn with Unicheck, I turn it so the database is turned on. So I'm now collecting a repository of their final drafts. And what that does help me do is that helps me cut down on students who are submitting a friend's assignment a next semester. So I do change up my assignments quite frequently, but if maybe it's from the fall to the spring and I'm using a same essay prompt or something like that, it is possible for someone to use a friend's essay. So I'm able to find that at the final draft. Because I'm working with a lot of first-year college students, I do like to start out the first instance of any type of academic integrity issue as I think you made a mistake sort of conversation, rather than really starting with the hammer going down. And again, that just makes students aware that we have these tools, we use these tools, but they're not necessarily something that diminishes the trust between a teacher and a student. I think that's about all. Mary, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that was a good summary. I've seen a couple questions. Somebody did ask whether you could, it had to be connected with an institution or you can have it on your own. I will check on that and add that to the chat as we go along. So I don't think I have anything to add. Thank you, Jennifer.
All right, so for the next slide, if we could go to that. I can go ahead and introduce to you Michael Sullivan. He is the Director of E-Learning at Middlesex County College, and he's going to talk to you a bit about Turnitin, which is a tool, plagiarism detection tool similar to Unicheck.
Hi, thank you everyone. Welcome, thanks for coming out today. Just a couple of questions going on in the chat. There's not one perfect way to detect plagiarism, to do different things. So, not one way is perfect. So yeah, we're trying all different kinds of ways. So, we understand that nothing is foolproof, trust me. And then the question popped up regarding like Respondus. Different schools are using different tools in that regard. So that might be another session down the line regarding like Respondus, like Proctorio, different things like that. But, in this case, Middlesex, we've been using Turnitin for about 3 years. And, it's a great tool. It's integrated within Canvas, which is really nice. A couple clicks and you can kind of set your plagiarism detection right then and there. From there, it kind of gives a similarity score or a percentage. And then from there, you can get a match overview where you can actually see, okay, where is the student pulling the information from? So, going through all that, it has a grammar checker as well. And then you can do match overview and do a rubric creation if you want to kind of stay within Turnitin as opposed to going through your LMS. So next slide, please. My portion is really quick. So, I thought about, well, I could go over tips and tricks with Turnitin. One of the biggest things and one of the biggest questions I get with Turnitin is, if you have Turnitin integrated within your LMS at your institution, 9 times out of 10, you can pretty much access it outside of the learning management system. You can actually, if you were to log into Turnitin with your school email address, and if you click on forgot password, it'll kick out an email where you can set a password. So that way, if you wanted to kind of do a one-off, if you needed to submit one paper inside Turnitin without having to go through the LMS and everything, you could actually do it. With Turnitin, after you log in, you would just go to account settings, and then in there, there's an area there where it says activate quick submit. You just turn on yes, and then from there, once you get out of there, if you'll notice, after you do that, you'll see a tab that says quick submit. I've had some instances where some instructors have asked, I need to find out, I need to submit this paper real quickly, or it might be department chair might ask me, hey, I need to, find out if, without having to throw this in my LMS and have to set an assignment up, if, with the similarity score for, this student's submission. So that's the biggest tip that I can really give with Turnitin. Basically, you can access it outside of the learning management system, which is pretty nice. I've used it a couple times. So, and if you notice in that little area, number 3, you'll see it just gives a quick one-off similarity score. You can click in there, the same kind of tool that you would use within the LMS, that's integrated within Turnitin, you can do it there. Next slide, please. So I decided to kind of, based off of what some people have told me, some people have been trying to thwart Turnitin, yeah. And I've heard kind of more and more people have been submitting JPEG images as their papers, which is kind of crazy in that regard. But, if that ever happens, and I know I can speak to a couple of my colleagues, we have Adobe Creative Cloud, we can take that paper. And the cool thing with Adobe is it has optical character recognition, where you could basically take that JPEG and turn it into a PDF or a Word document and then slam it right through that way I told you and turn it in, that way to get a similarity score. So, it's been crazy, like, hearing the stories, like I said, of people submitting JPEG images as their paper, thinking, students trying to sidestep everything. But, that's one way you can kind of get around it, and that you can kind of beat the student to the punch in that regard. And this is not to be punitive in any way, but, just trying to stay one step ahead of students in some cases. Next slide, please. And then someone brought up to me another tool that's out there. It's called SpinBot. So actually, from what I hear, it's in some ways it's actually kind of like Grammarly as well, where you can actually take written text from a different paper that might be created or whatnot. You can put it in, the main field up top there, enter text to rewrite, and then what it'll do is it'll spit it out in kind of a different kind of format. That way, it can kind of bypass possibly what Turnitin would do. But, nothing's foolproof. You don't know if it's going to work. But, that's one way students are kind of going around, with kind of copied work. So that's one thing that students are using as well. And then this information will be posted up on the website, the County College website. So the next slide, please. And so that was kind of my little brief kind of overture. So at this point, I'm going to introduce Dr. Brandi Granett. I've worked with her, had the pleasure of working with her at Mercer, and I'm so thrilled to see her kind of pop up in this session. So welcome, Brandi.
Mike. Next slide, please. So I'm here to talk to you guys about using screencasting to build connection. And one of the things that Jen talked about was using these tools to build conversation. And so screencasting is one way to build these conversations in multiple ways, whether you're doing live, remote, or online education, because we all take papers and grade them on our own. Next slide, please. So why video? Why should we use these screencasting tools? Well, auditory and visual learners, they need more than just text in order to engage and learn. And then additionally, as we deal with younger digital native as digital native students, they're what they call the YouTube Google Eye generation. And we're trying to create instructional methods that reach out and connect with them where they are, rather than having them meet us where we want to be. Plus, I find that screencasting is a great way to give voice to you and your feedback so that the students know that you are not, especially in the issue with plagiarism, that you're not upset with them, that you're trying to teach them, that you're there in a way trying to connect with them and get them to learn something rather than just a punitive grade on a page. Next slide, please. So there are a whole bunch of screencasting tools that you could use. Not going to read the slide to you, but definitely take a look at different ones. Some are free, some are more expensive. Personally, I use Snagit because it has education pricing and it integrates with YouTube. So I create my screencasting video, I can send it to YouTube, and then they do the automatic closed captioning, which is great for ADA requirements. I don't know how the other tools handle those kinds of closed captioning, not screen capturing. Closed captioning, I don't know how they all handle that, but it is a great way to make sure that you're ADA compliant while doing these videos. So that is my favorite, because then I get a YouTube link and I can insert it in the discussion board or in the assignments area or email it to students. Next slide. So what can you do to give voice in your classroom? You can walk through and do video announcements. So whether you're on the screen or whether your text is on the screen, because I know personally prior to all of these Zooms, I never wanted to be seen on the screen. Now we do it all day, every day, so I'm getting a little better at it. But I much preferred the screencasting format where I had just the text or what I wanted my students to look at or a cute picture of my dog, and then talk to them about what they needed to know for the week. You can also do rubric walkthroughs. A lot of times we write rubrics and we use instructor language, and it's geared towards our program outcomes and things we need to know for our institution, rather than things that our students know for success. So you can use screencasting to go through your rubric and break down each one of the points and explain to students how that then ties to the assignments. My favorite way to use screencasting, though, is with real-time written assignment feedback. And this ties to the academic integrity section especially well, because when students know that you are there, a real live person engaging with their ideas in their actual paper, it helps them to be more motivated to complete the assignment and more motivated to complete the assignment with their own work. So what I'll do is I'll open up my students' work, and I will start to read it, and I narrate as I'm reading it. I correct grammar and I explain why. I engage with their ideas. I ask them questions. I point out areas where they're going to need more research or where perhaps they needed to use their own words. I point out where they needed better transitions or where they may have missed the mark on some of their thinking. So giving that overview as I'm grading it, as I'm looking at it, both saves me time and gives them more robust feedback. I can also do this in the discussion board. So I'll open up the discussion board and I will either copy and paste some snippets from a variety of students and then talk to them about their ideas and connect them together, or I use it to correct things like grammar issues or APA style, or I use it to share additional resources and prompt them to think more deeply about what they're talking about in the discussion board. But giving voice to it and having some direct examples that I can highlight on the screen, I feel makes it more robust than if I just created a little post to them. Next slide, which I think is my last slide. Yep, thank you guys.
Okay, so typically with every presentation that we've done, we always provide the additional readings that we have found useful in doing our jobs every day. I know there's many distance ed people out here. And so all of this will be posted on the College for Student Success website. And as you can see, we gave you our Turnitin and Unicheck. So once again, every institution subscribes to something different depending upon budgets and integration with your LMS system. I know some of you use Blackboard and Canvas. We here use Moodle. I know Bergen uses Moodle as well. But once again, every institution is different. Every division is different. And your policies and your academic integrity policies should really, that comes from, once again, your institution and how you also deal with it, because this question came up the last time. I think I forgot which workshop or seminar we were talking about, or what the topic of discussion was. But you know, those policies, I think somebody had asked, you know, well, how do you report the cheating, or what do you do, who do you send it to? Really, that's determined by your division and also your institution. So really what you need to do is check within your college to see how and what you should be doing. So a lot of the questions in here, and I've been monitoring the chat. Melanie, I know you're still here. You may want to unmute yourself. So we have a lot of questions regarding the actual research. So today's presentation was just to give you an overview, because once again, we know that the entire state, the entire nation, the globe basically went to emergency remote teaching. And a lot of you may have been in the traditional teaching in the classroom where you're showing up every day and your students are there every day. So now you're online, and now you hear, oh, online cheats and this and that and everything else. So this is what we said. We really wanted to get Melanie's work out there, because there are some differences, but there's also a lot of similarities. So Melanie, I know we had some questions about the demographics of your study, and
Sure.
Did you find any differences with any of the divisions? I don't know if you can scroll through really quick.
So I didn't bring demographic data with me today. I mean, obviously that's a presentation in of itself. But there are enough people in about 4 or 5 different majors to draw conclusions about those majors. I saw nursing scroll by my eyes. One of them is health sciences education. I did get enough of those students to draw some conclusions. I do have students just that run across the gamut. You have to remember, when you're considering this particular data, there are 5 different schools included, and the language that's used in the study has to speak to students in 5 different schools. So it's phrased in terms of primary course of study, not major necessarily, and I can't distill down to very particular areas, because something that's really important when you are sending out a survey on cheating specifically is you have to give the survey taker the confidence to tell you the truth. And the more specific information that you ask them about what their age is, what their major is, what their favorite color is, the more they're going to be concerned that you're going to be able to track them down by those answers. So this is important, that I only have general overviews. I have ranges. I don't have anything specific that I can drill down. Something that is really interesting to me in this particular survey is that there's a set of about 100 people who I'll call serial cheaters. They just check off, you know, they've done a lot of it. It would also be really interesting to study them and find different things. I will tell you that the background in cheating in the literature indicates that the higher the stakes, the more likely cheating will occur. That's what Dan Ariely's research indicates, that the higher the stakes, the more likely cheating will occur. If you have a student that doesn't care, they're less likely to cheat, they'll fail on their own. But the student that is really, that's why health sciences education data is interesting. So I'm not prepared to drill down to any specific demographic, but I do have some figures, some of which I can draw conclusions on, and some groups are too small to draw those conclusions.
Great. Thank you, Melanie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, and then also, you know, this is Mike. You know, a lot of us have talked, and it's a huge topic at our meetings, DEAG meetings we've been holding basically every week. You know, the biggest one is, okay, proctoring services, you know, okay, respondents, who are you using? What have you seen here? And, you know, okay, well, this one doesn't work with Chromebooks. So, I mean, it's an ongoing discussion that we're having at every session, you know, how, you know, nothing's foolproof, but we are trying to kind of find what's working best for everyone, and we try to take that back to our schools. So trust me, we are well aware that this is a huge hot topic issue.
Yeah, and I'll speak on our part. I know we're still looking at services, because within one area of our college, they're saying, oh no, we want to use this, and in another area, they're saying, oh no, we want to use this. Well, we can't. It doesn't work that way, because what we have to do is we have to make sure that it's right for everybody, and to make sure that it's right for our LMS system. I know we've talked Respondus, that's huge, that's a big one. You know, there's also ProctorU, there's Proctorial. Well, now there's a new one called HonorLock. I think somebody had mentioned it in the chat. And HonorLock is actually able to detect their cell phone usage within range, and they have, you know, somebody that goes in live, but guess what? It's not compatible with every LMS. That's another thing. So, you know, we really, as distance educators, we look into these things. So, you know, what works for one may not work for all. And then I know the question came up somewhere along the lines of, well, what about webcams? Because don't forget, in Respondus Monitor, they have to have their webcam on. You know, so you know, is that an invasion of privacy? I've heard that before as well. Okay, even though they are, you know, subscribing to the online format, is it an invasion of privacy, you know, to that student? So there's a lot of different things that go into the decisions that the institutions make, but really we as distance educators, we look at it for the entire institution. So while there's not one solution, and I think you all can agree with me on here. I know Josh logged in, and Mike, you're here, and Melanie, and Archana, and Nora. There's not one solution anywhere. And are students going to cheat? I think we can all say yes. And I know that's a shame to say it, but we hear it all the time. But we, as educators, can do things to prevent, to deter, right? And by using some of the skills that both Brandi and Jennifer talked about today, using Bloom's taxonomy. I know math is high stakes. There were a couple math questions going on in the chat. I don't know if they were addressed or not. Does anybody want to give some tips, Mike, or Nora, Josh, or Shauna? Anybody on math, on cheating and math?
Yes, so I had actually replied to that because that was covered in my presentation very little bit, you know. We're not going deep into it, but in math, you have, in fact, the easiest job. You just change a few numbers and the whole problem's answer changes. Now, if they're looking at some shared place and these answers are being put up all the time, just go in and every semester change a few numbers. That's my advice to you. That would really help you. Yeah.
Yeah, and I will say
that I wouldn't describe it as easy. Archana, I would take a little bit of a different point of view. I think our math faculty have some real legitimate concerns, as we all do, and I think everything that you said today and the rest of the panelists did address that as best we can. At Brookdale, our faculty are trying to do it with different ways of measuring. You know, part of the test will be proctored on Respondus Monitor. Then another part of the test, as Archana suggests, will be, you know, having different number sets or something like that set up, and they can do a multiple choice piece, and that would be tightly timed. So we're doing a lot of recommending about the tightly timed, and maybe you give an open book test.
Yeah.
You know, and you say, okay, if I know what the plus symbol means, doesn't mean I know how to use it. And Archana, as you had suggested, to be testing for those higher order thinking skills. But I think we could agree there's no perfect answer. But
and I came out wrong. I really didn't mean that the job was easy. No teacher's job is easy at all. What I meant was that changing the numbers is easier than changing full questions. That's all I meant. So I take that back. My bad.
I think it's important with any of these.
Don't be afraid of writing.
To have multiple measures, so it's just not an exam. There's different measures in there. And that's also just good from some students don't do well in tests, right? So you want to have multiple measures for that reason. The other thing I would just say too, whatever your policy is, make sure it's very clear. and it's out there and it's easy for a student to know. And if you're going to have like you were talking, Lee, invasion of privacy with the webcam, make sure that the student knows ahead of time it's a requirement. And then if the student doesn't want to do that, then they have the ability not to take that course, right? But it's just really important you put those policies out there so the students know what they're getting themselves into.
Yeah, exactly. And once again, and I'll stress this, and thank you, Josh, our chair of the Distance Ed Affinity Group, for logging in and joining us and answering that question so eloquently.
Sideways, even our fearless leader.
You like my sideways? Yeah.
I do. You're doing good. But there's no one solution, and that's what we have been discussing every single week in every single meeting with pretty much any single topic. There's really no solution that's going to perfectly fit inside a little box for everyone, for every subject, for every institution. So really the purpose, once again, of these webinars is we have faculty and administrators from around the state of New Jersey, and we're here to present what we have found that has worked for us, that has worked in that particular institution, to give what we know that may work with a particular division or subgroup. So really, once again, these are tips. It doesn't apply to everyone. It doesn't apply to one particular institution, whether it's Essex or Middlesex or Salem. But these are things that you can explore, and not a lot of what we have encountered, I think, through these webinars is because so many were thrown into this emergency remote teaching that we wanted to give you some type of forum on a statewide level to have this discussion, to find out what the other practices are, because I think, and every single one of us in here, I know in the Affinity Group can say, we typically hear, oh, well, did you hear what the other institution's doing? Well, nobody's doing this and nobody's doing that. Well, that's not true. Okay, so, and this is part of the reason why. So, once again, math, science, the high stakes, nursing, yes, these are high stakes. Health sciences, Melanie, you addressed that earlier. While it may not be foolproof, you may want to lock down your test, with a time, avoid multiple choice, have them use those critical thinking, skills, possibly change some of the numbers around, that could help. You may want to have them submit or upload photos of scrap paper even, this way it's their work. Yeah, I mean, there's just different ways. I know one math faculty member that I was speaking with recently, we use Zoom here at the college, as you know, because we're using it right now. They were proctoring using, Zoom. Now, is it foolproof? No, but, they kind of had to manage it. So once again, there's no one fit solution to any of this. These are just things, and once again, we really wanted to get that out there to everyone. So I think, Jake, did I miss any?
No, I just want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. Again, we're going to make this available on the Center for Student Success website shortly. One thing I want to share with all of you who are still on the line, if any of you have any ideas for a statewide presentation, we talked a lot about math here just momentarily, but if any of you would like to share how you are delivering math instruction in an online environment, that's a topic that we would love to be able to feature. Please send an email to me. You should have my email address, jfarbman@njccc.org. Whether it's math or whatever innovation or best practice that you use in delivering online instruction or online student services, please reach out to me. As you can tell, these folks here in the Distance Education Affinity Group are very friendly, and they welcome all of you with open arms if you would like to be one of our presenters. And our faculty who joined us this week, they will attest we didn't torture them too much.
Love it.
But thank you all very much. We appreciate you being with us today.
One more thing. So in addition to everything being up, we have one more work. We're going to take a break next week. I know we're off next week in terms of workshops. And our next workshop will be, Jake, I forgot the date.
Maybe the 9th or the 16th. We're not sure, but it's going to resume on Tuesdays. We're going to take a couple weeks off because it's Memorial Day next week, and then summer classes are starting up, things of that nature. So we want to take a 2-week respite, and then we're going to resume, I think, the first full week of June. But we'll send an email out to everybody once we have the topic finalized and our presenters finalized.
Yeah, and once again, I encourage you to, if you have a presentation topic, especially, we really want to hear from faculty. You know, the administrators that are here in the group, we love you. We think it's great, but we also know the importance of faculty speaking to faculty as well. And that's important. And I know Melanie teach, we all teach in some capacity. But please reach out to Jake with any workshop topic, and then we can get that going. So, okay, we're done, I think. No, there's no more questions, right?
None.
None.
We can hit the stop record button too. I think we're
Okay.
good. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
You and bye.